On an ordinary bus ride, a heartbreaking incident occurred when a racist man attacked an innocent black girl. However, what makes this event particularly remarkable is that a Navy SEAL witnessed the entire situation and immediately intervened to stop the violence, protecting the girl from harm. This story is not only about an act of heroism, but also serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of unity and community responsibility in confronting racism and social injustice. The bus rattled down the uneven road, the sound of its engine blending with the murmur of passengers. Among them was Lily, a bright-eyed 8-year-old with her braids tied neatly with red ribbons. She clutched her school bag tightly, her legs swinging off the seat as she glanced out of the window, enchanted by the passing cityscape. Next to her sat an older man with flushed cheeks, his alcohol-soaked breath thick in the air. He swayed slightly, mumbling incoherently to himself. His presence made the passengers uneasy, but Lily seemed to ignore him, her attention fixed on the world outside. At the back of the bus, a broad-shouldered man sat silently, his muscular frame barely fitting into the narrow seat. His gaze was steady and observant. The man, John Carter, was a retired Navy SEAL, recently returned from a decade of deployments. Seeking peace in the mundane, he had chosen to take the bus that day, blending into the crowd. But his keen instincts never truly rested. He scanned the passengers out of habit, noting their body language and the subtle shifts in the air that spoke of tension. The atmosphere shifted abruptly when the man next to Lily began to speak louder, his slurred words laced with disdain, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the little girl. Other passengers exchanged worried glances but remained silent, unwilling to provoke the escalating situation. Lily's innocence and calm demeanor seemed to agitate the man further, and his drunken tirade took a darker turn. "You people think you own everything," he spat, his voice rising above the hum of the bus. Lily turned to him, confused and scared, her wide eyes questioning his anger. Before anyone could react, the man's fist flew through the air, landing a sharp blow to Lily's cheek. The bus fell into a shocked silence, passengers frozen in disbelief. But not John. The moment he saw the man's hand move, his military training kicked in. In an instant, he was out of his seat, his towering presence now casting a shadow over the drunk man. John's voice, low and authoritative, cut through the tension like a knife. "You've made a mistake you're going to regret." The bus seemed to hold its breath as John loomed over the man, the passengers still stunned by the audacity of the act. Lily, clutching her cheek, let out a soft whimper, her wide eyes filling with tears. John crouched briefly, his hand gentle as he checked Lily's face for injury. "Are you hurt, sweetheart?" he asked, his deep voice carrying a surprising warmth. She nodded hesitantly, too shocked to form words. John's jaw tightened, and his gaze shifted to the man who had struck her. The drunkard, now fully aware of the towering figure before him, slurred out a defensive, "She deserved it," sitting there like she owns the place. His words, drenched in venom, ignited a spark in John's steely eyes. Slowly, methodically, John straightened to his full height, his hands clenched into fists by his sides. The bus felt smaller, the tension heavier as the passengers watched the confrontation unfold. "You're going to apologize," John said, his voice low but firm, carrying the weight of someone used to being obeyed. The man laughed nervously, his bravado faltering under John's unrelenting glare. "Or what?" he challenged. Though his voice quivered, John stepped closer, his movements deliberate, and the man shrank back into his seat. "Or I'll make sure you remember this moment every time you think of raising your hand to someone weaker than you." The passengers began to shift in their seats, emboldened by John's stance. A young woman pulled out her phone, recording the scene. While an elderly man muttered about time, someone stood up to people like him. John wasn't looking for praise. His focus remained locked on the man before him. "You think your size or your drunken rage gives you power?" John said, his tone sharp. "Real strength isn't about intimidation. It's about protecting those who need it most." The bus driver, having finally stopped the vehicle, called out, "What's going on back there?" But John didn't look up. This was far from over. The bus driver, a burly man with a deep voice, stepped into the aisle, his presence commanding attention. Hey, hey, what's going on here? He demanded, his gaze darting between John and the drunk man. Before anyone could explain, a middle-aged woman from the front of the bus shouted, "That man hit the little girl. Someone call the police." Her words sent a ripple through the passengers, many of whom now voiced their outrage. The atmosphere, once silent and tense, became charged with anger and indignation. John turned to the driver, his tone calm but authoritative. "Call the police. This man assaulted a child." The driver nodded, pulling out his phone to dial. The drunkard, now realizing the gravity of his situation, began to squirm in his seat. Wait. This is all a misunderstanding," he stammered, holding his hands up defensively. John's eyes narrowed. "You don't misunderstand punching a defenseless child," he said, his voice a low growl. As the bus remained stationary, passengers began surrounding the drunk man, forming an impromptu barrier. Some recorded the scene on their phones, while others offered comfort to Lily, who was still visibly shaken. A kind elderly woman handed her a tissue and whispered soothing words. "It's going to be okay, dear," she said softly, patting Lily's hand. John knelt beside the little girl again, his expression softening. "Lily, do you have someone waiting for you at home?" he asked gently. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mom." The drunk man attempted to push past the growing crowd, mumbling something about leaving, but John's hand shot out, firm and unyielding. "You're not going anywhere until the police get here," he said. The man's face turned pale as he realized there was no escape. His bravado had melted into fear, and his earlier arrogance was now replaced with desperation. The bus became a bubble of collective justice, passengers united in ensuring the man faced consequences for his actions. John's presence anchored them, his quiet strength offering a sense of safety and resolve. The distant sound of sirens grew louder, cutting through the murmur of the passengers. The bus driver stood at the door, waving down the approaching police car. Inside, the tension remained palpable as all eyes stayed on the drunk man, who was now sweating profusely. He muttered to himself, alternating between weak protests and half-hearted apologies. John stood firm, his imposing figure blocking any path of escape. His calm demeanor only heightened the gravity of the moment. Lily sat with her small hands cradling her cheek, the redness of the impact still visible. Several passengers offered her comforting smiles and words of encouragement. A middle-aged woman gently handed her a juice box, while an older man said, "You're so brave, little one." Lily managed a small nod, but her eyes were still wide with fear. John crouched beside her again, his voice steady and reassuring. "You're safe now, Lily. No one is going to hurt you again." She looked up at him, her gaze filled with a mixture of trust and gratitude. The bus doors hissed open, and two uniformed police officers stepped inside. One scanned the crowd while the other immediately locked eyes on the drunk man. "That's him," John said, his voice cutting through the chatter. "He assaulted this child." The officer's expression hardened as they approached the man. "Sir, you need to come with us," one said firmly, pulling out handcuffs. The man began to protest, his words slurred and incoherent, but the officers didn't waver. Within moments, his hands were cuffed behind his back and he was being escorted off the bus. As the man was led away, a ripple of relief swept through the passengers. Several people cheered quietly, their anger giving way to a sense of justice served. The officer remaining on the bus turned to John. John extended his hand. "John Carter, I intervened when he hit the girl." The officer nodded appreciatively. "We need your statement, Mr. Carter, and the girl's mother should be contacted." John turned to Lily, crouching down to her level. "Lily, do you know your mom's phone number?" She nodded and recited it slowly, her voice still trembling. John relayed the number to the officer, who promptly made the call. The passengers began to settle, their chatter now filled with praise for John and sympathy for Lily. John, ever watchful, stayed by Lily's side, his protective instincts still on high alert. Outside, the flashing lights of the police car illuminated the night, signaling an end to the ordeal and the beginning of justice for Lily. The bus had gone quiet again, the emotional weight of the incident settling over everyone. Lily sat still, holding a cold bottle of water someone had given her to soothe her bruised cheek. John remained by her side, his presence unwavering. Outside, the drunk man sat in the back of the police car, his head hanging low, the reality of his actions seemingly starting to sink in. The officer who had called Lily's mother returned, stepping onto the bus with a reassuring nod. "She's on her way," he said, his voice calm. "She's very concerned." Minutes later, a car screeched to a halt near the bus. A woman in her early 30s, her face a mixture of fear and urgency, rushed toward the vehicle. "Lily," she called, her voice cracking as she ran to the open doors. John stood and stepped aside, giving the woman room to embrace her daughter. Lily leapt into her mother's arms, tears streaming down her face as she finally let go of the tension she had been holding in. "Mommy," she sobbed, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. Lily's mother, a strong and composed woman named Angela, held her tightly, stroking her daughter's hair and whispering words of comfort. Her sharp eyes quickly took in John and the officer. "What happened? Who hurt my baby?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and concern. John stepped forward, his tone respectful yet firm. "A drunk man assaulted her. He's in custody now, and the police are handling it." He hesitated for a moment, then added, "She was incredibly brave." Angela's eyes softened as she turned to John. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "Thank you for being there for her." John nodded, his gaze briefly meeting hers before returning to Lily, who clung to her mother as if letting go would bring back the danger. The officer stepped in, gently explaining the process of filing charges and the need for a formal statement. Angela listened intently, nodding as she absorbed the information. Her composure returned, and she assured them she would do whatever was necessary to ensure justice was served. As the bus began to empty, passengers stopped to offer Angela and Lily words of support. Some praised John for his actions, while others expressed their outrage at the drunk man's behavior. John, ever humble, deflected the attention, focusing instead on ensuring Lily was okay. "She's strong," he said quietly to Angela as the bus emptied out. "Stronger than she should have to be." Angela's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she nodded. "She gets it from her mother," she replied with a bittersweet smile. With the bus now emptied of passengers, John stood by the door, watching as Angela held Lily tightly. The flashing police lights outside had dimmed, signaling that the officers were wrapping up their work. One officer approached Angela, handing her a card. "We'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to give your statement," he said kindly. Angela nodded, her arm protectively wrapped around Lily. "I'll be there, whatever it takes to make sure he's held accountable." John stepped back slightly, ready to disappear into the background as he always did. Angela noticed his retreat and called out, "John, wait, please, don't go just yet." Angela called out, "Wait." John turned, his expression calm but questioning. "I don't even know your name," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You saved my daughter. I want to thank you properly." John hesitated before responding. "John Carter," he said simply, "and there's no need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." Angela shook her head firmly. "Not everyone," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "What you did took courage. You didn't just protect her. You stood up for her when no one else did." John's expression softened slightly, but he remained humble. "I just did what was right," he replied. "Lily didn't deserve what happened to her. No one does." His words carried the weight of someone who had seen too much injustice in the world. As the police car pulled away with the drunk man inside, Lily reached out toward John. "Thank you, Mr. John," she said softly, her voice filled with sincerity. Her small hand slipped into his, and for the first time that evening, a faint smile broke across John's face. "You're welcome, Lily," he said gently. "You're a brave little girl. Don't ever forget that." Angela's car was parked nearby, and as she led Lily toward it, she turned back one last time. "If you ever need anything, John, you'll always have our gratitude," she said. John nodded but didn't respond. As they drove away, He stood silently by the side of the road, the weight of the evening settling over him. He had spent years protecting others in war zones. But moments like this reminded him why he had chosen that path. The bus driver approached him, breaking the silence. "You've got a good heart," he said, clapping John on the shoulder. "Not everyone would have done what you did tonight." John shrugged, his gaze still fixed on the fading taillights of Angela's car. "Sometimes doing the right thing is all that matters," he said quietly. With that, he stepped off the bus and into the night, his figure disappearing into the shadows, a quiet hero who expected nothing in return. The night was quiet as John walked the dimly lit streets, his footsteps steady and deliberate. His thoughts drifted to Lily's tear-streaked face, the fear in her eyes, and the gratitude of her mother. It wasn't the first time he'd stepped in to protect someone, but this encounter felt different. John had spent years on battlefields, fighting enemies in foreign lands. But the war against injustice at home always seemed far more personal. John's apartment was modest, tucked away in a quiet part of the city. The walls were bare except for a single framed photograph on the mantel, a picture of his Navy SEAL team. Their faces were young and determined, each man wearing a proud but weary smile. John picked up the photo, his fingers tracing the faces of his brothers in arms. "We fought for something bigger than ourselves," he muttered, his voice heavy with emotion. But tonight's events reminded him that the battle never really ended. It just changed form. Sitting at the small kitchen table, John poured himself a glass of water, his mind replaying the scene on the bus. He couldn't shake the thought of Lily's vulnerability, the fragility of her trust shattered in an instant by a man who should have known better. John had faced countless dangers, but seeing a child harmed for no reason struck a chord deeper than he expected. It brought back memories he had buried long ago of his own childhood, marked by a father who wielded his fists more often than his words. John leaned back, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. He had spent his life trying to be the opposite of the man who raised him, dedicating himself to protecting others and standing against bullies in any form. Tonight had been a reminder of why that mission mattered. Yet it also stirred a longing he couldn't ignore, the desire for connection, for a purpose beyond being a silent guardian in the shadows. As the hours passed, John sat in silence, his mind torn between the weight of his past and the uncertainty of his future, and the hope he'd seen in Lily's eyes. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain: he would continue to fight for what was right, no matter the cost. Outside, the city buzzed with life, oblivious to the quiet resolve of the man who had once again proven that true strength lies not in fists, but in the courage to protect the vulnerable. The morning sun filtered through the blinds in Angela's modest apartment as Lily sat at the kitchen table, poking at a bowl of cereal. Her cheek was less swollen now, but the emotional wounds were still fresh. Angela, sitting across from her, sipped her coffee and watched her daughter closely. "Sweetheart, how are you feeling?" she asked gently, her voice tinged with concern. Lily hesitated, her small fingers tracing the edge of the table. "Why did that man hit me?" "Mommy?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. The question pierced Angela's heart. She reached across the table, taking Lily's hands in hers. "Sometimes people are mean because they're angry or scared inside," she said carefully. "But what he did was wrong, and he's going to face the consequences." The doorbell rang, breaking the heavy silence. Angela got up, glancing through the peephole before opening the door. Standing there was John, his tall frame filling the doorway, holding a small bag in his hand. "I wanted to check on Lily," he said, his voice low but kind. Angela stepped aside, motioning him in. "That's very thoughtful of you." "She's at the table." Lily's face lit up when she saw John. "Mr. John," she exclaimed, running to him. He crouched to her level, a faint smile breaking across his serious face. "Hey, brave girl, how's the cheek?" She touched it gingerly. "It's better," she said. John handed her the bag. "I thought you might like this." Inside was a small teddy bear, soft and cuddly, with a tag that read "Stay Strong." Lily hugged it tightly, her smile growing wider. "Thank you," she whispered. Angela watched the interaction, her heart swelling with gratitude. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice soft. John stood, his gaze meeting hers. I wanted to, he replied simply. Kids like Lily remind me why it's important to stand up when it matters. His words lingered in the air, resonating deeply with Angela. She offered him a seat, and as they sat down, she said, "You're welcome here anytime, John." The three of them spent the next hour talking, the heaviness of the previous day slowly giving way to lighter moments. Lily giggled as John shared funny stories from his time in the Navy, carefully chosen to make her smile without revealing the harsher realities of his past. For a while, it felt like a family moment, unexpected but comforting. John left later that morning, but as he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he belonged somewhere. The courthouse buzzed with quiet murmurs as Angela entered, holding Lily's hand tightly. The little girl clutched her new teddy bear, her small fingers gripping it like a lifeline. Angela had spent the past few days preparing Lily for this moment, assuring her that she wouldn't have to face the man who hurt her directly. Still, she could feel her daughter's anxiety in the way she leaned into her side, seeking comfort. John was already there, standing near the entrance. His presence was a calming anchor, his steady gaze meeting Angela as she approached. "You didn't have to come," she said softly, though her grateful smile betrayed her relief at seeing him. John shook his head. "Yes, I did," he replied firmly. "Lily deserves to know she's not alone." The proceedings were brief but intense. The man, now sober, sat hunched in his seat, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the courtroom. His lawyer attempted to downplay his actions, citing his intoxicated state as a mitigating factor. Angela felt her blood boil at the excuses, but she kept her composure, focusing on holding Lily close. When it was Angela's turn to speak, she stood tall, her voice clear and unwavering. "My daughter is only 8 years old," she began, her eyes locking on the judge. She didn't deserve to be attacked for simply existing. This wasn't just an assault on her body. It was an assault on her innocence, her sense of safety in the world. And no amount of apologies or excuses can undo that. The judge nodded solemnly, taking in Angela's words before turning his attention to the defendant. After reviewing the evidence, including witness statements and the video footage from the bus, the judge delivered his verdict. The man was sentenced to jail time for his actions, with additional mandatory counseling and community service. The courtroom let out a collective sigh of relief, though Angela knew the road to healing was far from over. Outside, John waited with Lily while Angela finalized some paperwork. He knelt beside her, his voice gentle. "You did so well in there, Lily. You're stronger than you think." She nodded, her grip on the teddy bear loosening just slightly. "Will he hurt anyone else now?" she asked quietly. John shook his head. "No, he won't. Not after today." Angela joined them moments later, her expression one of quiet determination. "It's over," she said, more to herself than anyone else. John placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've done right by Lily," he said. "That's what matters most." Angela smiled at him, feeling the weight of the ordeal begin to lift. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to hope that they could move forward stronger together. Weeks passed since the trial, and life had started to settle into a new rhythm for Angela and Lily. The scars from that fateful night were slowly healing, though the memories lingered. Angela noticed Lily growing quieter, her once boisterous energy subdued. She decided it was time to bring some light back into their lives, and she knew just the person to help. On a crisp Saturday morning, Angela invited John over for breakfast. The smell of pancakes filled the cozy apartment as Lily sat at the table, her teddy bear propped up beside her. When John knocked, Lily was the first to leap up and open the door, her face lighting up at the sight of him. "Mr. John," she exclaimed, pulling him inside. John grinned, holding up a small potted plant. "Thought your teddy might like some company," he said, handing it to her. Lily giggled, placing the plant next to her bear. Over breakfast, the atmosphere was warm and easy, the three of them sharing stories and laughter. John's presence had become a source of comfort for both Angela and Lily, a steady reassurance that they weren't alone. As they ate, Angela noticed something she hadn't seen in a while. Lily's eyes sparkled again. It was a small victory, but it meant the world. After breakfast, John suggested a walk in the park. Lily was thrilled at the idea, bundling up in her jacket and grabbing John's hand as they stepped outside. The park was bustling with life. Children playing, dogs chasing balls, and couples strolling hand in hand. For a while, the world seemed normal again, the shadows of the past fading into the background. As they walked, Angela fell and stepped beside John. "You've been good for her," she said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude. John glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "She's a special kid," he replied, "and you're an incredible mom. The strength you've shown through all this, it's inspiring." Angela looked down, a small smile playing on her lips. "I've had help," she admitted, meeting his gaze. For a moment the world around them seemed to pause, the connection between them undeniable. But before either could say more, Lily called out, pointing excitedly at a group of ducks near the pond. "Look, they're so funny." John chuckled, breaking the moment. "Let's go see," he said, his voice light. As the three of them moved toward the pond, the future felt a little brighter. They had faced darkness and come through it together. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. They had found something in each other worth holding on to. As the days turned into weeks, John became a regular presence in Angela and Lily's lives. It started with small gestures, a quick visit to check on them after work, bringing over groceries when Angela mentioned she was running low, or helping Lily with her homework. His calm demeanor and unwavering support created a sense of security that Angela hadn't realized they'd been missing. One evening, Angela invited John for dinner. It was a casual affair, the kind that had become familiar over the past few weeks. Lily had insisted on helping with the cooking, and the kitchen was filled with laughter as she proudly flipped pancakes while Angela supervised. John arrived just as the table was being set, his presence as steady and warm as ever. As they ate, the conversation turned to John's past. Lily, ever curious, asked, "Mr. John, were you really a soldier?" John nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. "I was," he said. "I traveled to a lot of places and worked with a team to keep people safe." Lily's eyes widened. "Like a superhero?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. John chuckled softly. "Something like that," he replied. Angela watched the exchange with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. She could see the weight John carried, the scars of experiences he rarely shared. Later that evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Angela and John sat on the small balcony, sipping coffee. The night air was cool, and the city lights twinkled in the distance. "You don't talk much about your past," Angela said gently, breaking the comfortable silence. John took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "There's not much to say," he began. "The military taught me discipline, strength, and purpose, but it also showed me how fragile life can be." Angela nodded, her expression soft. "It's clear that protecting others is in your nature," she said. "You've done so much for us, John, more than I could ever repay." John turned to her, his eyes serious but kind. "You don't owe me anything, Angela. Helping you and Lily, it's the right thing to do. And honestly, it's given me something I didn't know I needed." Angela's heart swelled at his words. In John, she saw not just a protector but a man who had found a new purpose in being there for her family. For the first time since the incident on the bus, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by fear or struggle, a future where they could all heal together. As the night deepened, Angela placed a hand on John's. "You've become a part of our lives, John," she said softly, "and I hope you'll stay." John looked at her, his expression thoughtful but full of quiet resolve. "As long as you'll have me," he replied. In that moment, they both knew that the bond they had formed was something rare and unbreakable, a foundation for a new chapter in all their lives. The morning sun streamed into Angela's apartment, painting the walls with a warm glow that matched the mood inside. The air was filled with the comforting aroma of coffee and pancakes as John worked in the kitchen, his movements steady and practiced. Lily sat at the table with Lucky sprawled at her feet, giggling as she tried to teach the puppy a new trick. It was a simple morning, but one that spoke volumes about how much had changed. Angela watched from the doorway, her arms crossed and a soft smile playing on her lips. It had been months since that fateful day on the bus, and though the memories of the incident lingered, they had been transformed into a story of resilience, healing, an unexpected connection. John, who had once been a stranger, was now a part of their lives in a way neither she nor Lily could have anticipated. "Breakfast is served," John announced, setting a plate of pancakes in front of Lily and another in front of Angela. He joined them at the table, his presence as steady and warm as ever and comforting as ever. Lily immediately began to eat, chattering about her plans for the day. Angela watched the two of them, her heart swelling with gratitude. After breakfast, they decided to take a walk in the park, one of their favorite weekend traditions. The crisp air and golden sunlight made the world feel alive. John held Lucky's leash while Lily skipped ahead, chasing after falling leaves. Angela fell into step beside John, her hand brushing against his. She glanced up at him, her eyes filled with unspoken words. "John," she said softly, drawing his attention. He looked at her, his expression calm but curious. "I just want to say thank you for everything, for being here for us." John stopped walking for a moment, turning fully to face her. "Angela," he began, his voice steady, "you and Lily have given me something I didn't even know I needed, a family." Angela smiled, her heart full. "Well, you're stuck with us now," she teased, her voice light but sincere. John chuckled, taking her hand in his. "I wouldn't have it any other way," he said. As they reached the pond, Lily ran back to them, her laughter filling the air. "Come on, slowpokes," she called, waving them over. Together, they walked toward the water, the three of them side by side. It wasn't just another day in the park. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with love, hope, and the unshakable bond of a family that had found each other against all odds. For John, Angela, and Lily, the story wasn't about what they had been through, but about what they had built together, a life where they could heal, grow, and face the future with open hearts. And in that moment, under the golden sky, they knew they had found their forever. Thank you all for watching until now. If you made it here, comment justice, and see you next time.